Stanley Kubrick was ambitious, divisive, and obsessive, but most of all, Stanley Kubrick was an undisputed master of the cinematic art form. Throughout his career, he's made pioneering films that distinctly convey his own voice, vision, and worldview, beginning his career independently and outside of the studio system with movies such as Killer's Kiss and The Killing. Kubrick was sure to protect his autonomy once he started working within the system, creating films that were ultimately free of studio interference and not dictated by commercial success and passing trends. Kubrick most famously said that if it can be written or thought, it can be filmed, and it seems that Kubrick practiced what he preached, as he drew inspiration for some of his greatest works from some of the most challenging books, which many considered to be unfilmable, including Lolita, A Clockwork Orange, The Shining, and Eyes Wide Shut. Following the collapse of his long-gestating Napoleon project, Kubrick wasn't keen to let his abundance of 18th century research go to waste, so he began his quest to find another period piece. Initially, William Makepeace Thackeray's Vanity Fair was Kubrick's first choice, but an abundance of recent TV and film adaptations made it less appealing and removed any sense of originality for Kubrick. It would be another, lesser-known piece of literature by Thackeray that would lead to the singular vision that would become Barry Lyndon. Barry Lyndon charts the life of an Irish chancer whose main desire is to rise up in Georgian society and become a man of status in a time where class and social standing is everything. Stanley Kubrick's epic tale of greed, ambition, self-obsession, and legacy makes for a unique take on the British period drama. Kubrick's iconoclastic approach cuts through the rigid surface of the social mores of its setting to bring out the hypocrisy and darkness at the heart of a seemingly civilized age.
No lad who has liberty for the first time and 20 guineas in his pocket is very sad. And Barry rode towards Dublin, thinking not so much of the kind mother left alone and of the home behind him, but of tomorrow and all the wonders it would bring.
Barry Lyndon is arguably Stanley Kubrick's least popular and underappreciated film. Its running length and deliberate pace alone is perhaps off-putting for some, and after Dr. Strangelove, 2001 and A Clockwork Orange, it might have appeared to be a tamer film from Kubrick. However, Barry Lyndon is in many ways the ultimate Kubrick film, where he would push his style and technical abilities even further. Kubrick's obsession for detail and authenticity creates a very immersive Georgian setting, but at the same time, it's very composed and painterly. No sets were constructed for Barry Lyndon. The entire film was made on location, in actual buildings and castles from the time. Scenes are played out in beautifully composed master shots, recalling landscape paintings from the era, and Kubrick films his characters and their reactions with such precision, not only with meticulous framing, but also through the editing of reactions and point-of-view shots to depict the tensions and desires between characters. Period dramas are generally a very wordy genre, so wedded are they to the great literature they're adapted from, whereas Kubrick almost throws out the book and uses the cinematic form to tell the stories. In cinema, faces do the telling, and Kubrick knows this better than anyone else, having used the close-up so effectively throughout his films, including 2001, A Clockwork Orange, The Shining, and Full Metal Jacket. Barry Lyndon is no different. The silent moments and stolen close-ups of faces portray the inner truths of the characters. We feel their jealousy, their anger, their wonder, and their melancholy, creating a lyrical experience that pulls you into its rhythm and the inner world of Barry Lyndon.
Captain Quinn is a man, and you're only a boy. You haven't a guinea in the world.
If ever I should meet him again, you will find out who is the best man of the two. I'll fight him sword or pistol, captain as he is.
Redmond, don't be so silly.
I mean it, Nora.
But Captain Quinn is already known as a valiant soldier. It is mighty well of you to fight farmers' boys, but to fight an Englishman is a very different matter.
The film opens with a fresh-faced Barry playing cards with his cousin Nora, who awkwardly seduces him and teases him by hiding a ribbon under her clothes. He's naive and inexperienced in the ways of the world, but Barry is also inexperienced with women. That won't be the case later. Following this scene, he falls in love with Nora and goes on a self-destructive mission to win her affection.
Forward! March!
As the military march into town, we see Barry watch from the sidelines, as villagers, and especially women, are enthralled by the men in uniform. He grows frustrated like a petulant and stubborn boy, as he foolishly tries to compete for Nora's affections with Army officer John Quinn. Kubrick again uses sharp editing to convey the tension between them as they sit at a dinner table. The scene culminates with Barry no longer able to contain his anger and challenging Quinn to a duel in order to publicly show his manhood. After he wins the duel, Barry is forced to leave home in order to evade the law and is literally a babe in the woods as he starts his quest to not only achieve status, but to become a man. Before his death, Stanley Kubrick planned to make an adaptation of Pinocchio, which sadly never came to fruition. One of the last films that Kubrick began developing, but was taken over by Steven Spielberg following his death, was AI, which was an update of the Pinocchio story, where an android boy goes on a quest to be reunited with his mother, but ultimately, he wants to become a real boy. In many ways, the first half of Barry Lyndon is reminiscent of the Pinocchio story as well. Barry is petulant but innocent. He misbehaves and ends up on a quest to be a real man as opposed to a real boy. When he first leaves home, he travels on horseback and stops at an inn and catches the eye of Captain Feeney and his son Seamus. Moments later, when Barry leaves the inn, he's stopped in the woods by two highwaymen who are none other than the Feeneys, and they take all his gold and his horse.
Captain Feeney, that's all the money my mother had in the world. Mightn't I be allowed to keep it? I'm just one step ahead of the law myself. I killed an English officer in a duel, and I'm on my way to Dublin till things cool down.
Mr. Barry, in my profession, we hear many such stories. Yours is one of the most intriguing and touching I've heard in many weeks. Nevertheless, I'm afraid I cannot grant your request.
In the original tale, while on his travels, Pinocchio meets a wolf and a cat who try to trick him out of his gold. They abandon him at an inn, and when he goes through the woods to find them, he's confronted by two highwaymen, the fox and the cat in disguise, and they attempt to steal his gold, very much bringing to mind Barry's encounter with the Feeneys. With no money, Barry's forced to join the army. During his time, he meets Captain Grogan, who he knows from his hometown. Grogan is like the cricket, popularised by Disney's incarnation, Jiminy Cricket. He not only looks after Barry while he's in the army, but also acts as his conscience.
Didn't you think of writing to your mother?
Of course I did. The shame I felt of losing all her money. My father's sword and pistols. I couldn't tell her.
Your mother wouldn't care a pin about those things. You're her only concern.
When Grogan is killed in combat, it seems that the horrors of war start to resonate with Barry, so he escapes by assuming the identity of an army messenger. It's here that, like Pinocchio, Barry begins to lie and deceive in order to survive the world he's found himself trapped in. Barry is eventually caught lying and is forced to spy for the Prussian army, and it's here that he meets his fellow countryman, the Chevalier. Moved by the coincidence, Barry can't bring himself to lie anymore, so he tells the Chevalier the truth, and just like the Blue Fairy, he helps Barry escape the army and gets him back home. Like Pinocchio, Barry gets a second chance, and thus begins his true transformation. Told in two parts, Kubrick uses the first part to chart Barry's rise and the second to show his fall. By the end of part 1, after gambling and hustling, Barry has finally achieved his ambition of social status by seducing and then marrying a woman of social standing, Lady Lyndon. The second part opens on Barry's wedding to Lyndon, and it's here he gains his titular surname. However, as much as he's infiltrated the hierarchy and in many ways disrupted it, he doesn't seem fulfilled. His marriage seems empty and loveless. It's merely a vehicle for his ambitions, and he continues to live like a libertine, spending his time in brothels and generally being unfaithful to his wife.
Do you not like your new father?
Not very much. He seems to me little more than a common opportunist.
Lurking in the shadows is his stepson, the young Lord Bullingdon, who resents Barry the moment he meets him. Their rivalry is the main focus of the second part. Kubrick uses the contrast of the two characters and the two parts like a reverse mirror image to show how much Barry has changed. Bullingdon mirrors the young Barry that we saw in part 1. He's besotted with his mother, much in the same way that Barry was obsessed with his cousin Nora in the opening scenes. Bullingdon's jealousy of Barry mirrors Barry's jealousy of Captain Quinn, the irony being that now that Barry is older and achieved status, has ultimately become Quinn. Kubrick underlines the point by mirroring two key scenes, the first being when Bullingdon insults and humiliates Barry in front of important guests at a social gathering, which results in Barry becoming a social outcast after he beats Bullingdon in public. This mirrors the early scene where Barry insults Quinn over dinner and throws a glass in his face, resulting in a duel, and that duel between Barry and Quinn is mirrored in the tense final duel between Barry and Bullingdon, which not only marks the beginning of the end for Barry, but underlines the main theme of the film, and that is the price of conformity.
Utterly baffled and beaten, what was the lonely and broken-hearted man to do? He took the annuity and returned to Ireland with his mother to complete his recovery. Sometime later, he traveled to the continent. His life there, we have not the means of following accurately. But he appears to have resumed his former profession of a gambler without his former success. He never saw Lady Lyndon again.
As the film draws to a close, we watch Barry fade into obscurity, and it becomes clear what may have drawn Kubrick to tell such a story. Kubrick carved out his own path as a filmmaker. He never compromised and never worried about fitting the mould. Relocating to England later in his career kept him away from the reach of Hollywood and meant that he would never have to change who he was as an artist. Barry Lyndon is ultimately a cautionary tale about the desire to conform and impress others at the expense of a person's own identity. Barry's quest for status and wealth results in him losing his individuality. When he joins the army, he's lost in a sea of faces and uniforms. He takes on another man's identity, then takes on another man's name, just so that he can conform. The name Lyndon, after all, is not his own. As his status grows, he hides beneath wigs and makeup like a mask, always concealing who he truly is. And in that final duel, when he concedes to Bullingdon by not firing at him, he's punished by having Bullingdon shoot his leg to pieces, resulting in the loss of his leg. It's almost as if Kubrick is telling us not to show any deference to the hierarchy, otherwise we'll be punished. The final title card could be interpreted as a reinforcement of this, suggesting that we all die equal, rich or poor, so why not die on your own sword? This reflects the creative risks that Kubrick took. He would rather fail on his own terms, or remove a film from circulation completely, as he did with A Clockwork Orange, than be held up to someone else's standards, and perhaps that's why Kubrick's bold and singular work will last forever. So that's my take on Barry Lyndon. Thanks for watching. See you next time.
As he rode away, Barry felt once more that he was in his proper sphere, and determined never again to fall from the rank of a gentleman.